Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about the build that I will be league starting in 3.18 EA Ballista Elementalist. Now, Crouching Tuna and myself tested this one extensively in 3.17, therefore later also league starting in 3.17, and a lot of people were a little bit uncertain about the build until they actually saw how it performed. And after the overwhelmingly positive feedback and basically no balance changes in 3.18, no new skills, I was thinking we definitely need to upgrade this one a little, because once you throw out a new build, a lot of smart people will pick it up, play it themselves, and give you really valuable feedback. So for this 3.18 edition, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna build upon that feedback, and I'm gonna give you the best possible league start experience. That being said, if you have played this build already in 3.17, you can skip the mechanics section completely. Also, if you don't like long videos, definitely use the timestamp section, or just speed the video up to whatever you need. Also, I will be live streaming my progress over on twitch.tv/Palsteron. So if you want to play along or just have a place to hang out with like-minded people, definitely check that out. But with that being said, let's get into the video. Now, first up, let's talk about our main skill, Explosive Arrow, and how it actually works. So Explosive Arrow is a attack, projectile, fire, duration skill, right? And we're basically going to scale its ignite damage. So basically, if I fire this skill, it will just be a blank arrow. And whenever that hits a target, that arrow will get stuck in that target, leaving a fuse. And you can stack these fuses up to a maximum of 20. And after a certain duration, which the base duration is 1 second, these fuses will go together into one big explosion. So if you look at the skill here, it says base duration is 1 second. So basically, you stick as many arrows in the enemy as possible, and after a second, it explodes. As you can see here, the explosion will have added fire damage for each fuse you have stuck in your enemy in that duration, and it exploded for. And also, it will have a bigger explosion radius, right? And down here is the biggest one, though. Explosions deal 5% more damage with hits and ailments per explosive arrow on target, which means that at maximum fuses, which is going to be 20, you will deal 100% more damage, basically doubling your damage, which is huge for ignites. And I'm sure from this explanation alone, you will already have figured out why ballistas are so good with this. The thing about this skill is normally totems or ballistas are just not very good with ignites because they have a lot of small hits, right? But in this case, all of these ballistas can stack the same fuses on the target, and they basically all belong to the same explosion, which makes it incredibly easy to stack to that maximum of 20 fuses. Now, how much attack speed do you actually need to reach those 20 fuses though, right? With 6 totems, you will need around about 2 to 2.5 attacks per second, which in game, you would just have to look here, attack time, it would be 0.5 second attack time, up to like, I don't know, 0.42-ish attack time. Now, why am I not going into the formula for this though? I did this last league and a lot of people got way too focused on hitting certain breakpoints. The problem is, in reality, it never happens like that. If you imagine a chaotic fight, for example, Feared, right? Think about how it will go down. So in order to actually calculate how many fuses you need exactly, you would have to always have all of your totems down. They would always have to be in radius. None of them have to be slowed, right? But that's not how it happens, right? Sometimes a totem dies. Sometimes an enemy moves out of range of the totems. Sometimes, I don't know, one unsummons because the duration is over. One gets chilled, one gets stunned. So overall, I wouldn't really stress out too much about attack rate. Just know that you want at least 2 attacks per second, and after that, the more the better, but you don't have to go overboard. And I'm saying don't go overboard because of Quill Rain specifically. It's very hard to go overboard just on gear, but if you use Quill Rain, the problem is you'll attack faster, but you'll get to the 20 fuses, and then you can't stack further, and you will still have the 30% less damage from the bow. Palsteron from the future here. One thing I forgot to touch on, which is very important for the skill, is that the fuse only gets stuck on the last enemy that you hit, which means that sources of Pierce, Fork, and Chain will actually completely brick your build against single targets. Because as you can imagine, if there is just one enemy here and I fire through it and it doesn't get the fuse, all your damage is gone. Now, you're not going to get accidental Chain or Fork, but it can happen that, for example, the implicit on your quiver has. In that case, don't use the quiver. Now, some more info on how this skill actually scales. So Explosive Arrow scales a little bit more like a spell, but it is an attack. What I mean by that is it really wants additional levels, right? On your endgame bow, you will want up to +3 levels, and on your endgame amulet, you will also want plus 2 levels. So DPS on your bow doesn't really do anything. Your attack speed is still important because it applies to fuses, but your damage will come from the amount of fuses that you have and not from your like physical damage or elemental damage from your bow. Also, something interesting about the skill is you actually don't want to scale its duration, right? If you think about how mapping with this build would go, you don't want to delay you killing the enemies too much because then you already want to move on, right? You don't want to wait there and forever, right? So any extra duration is not good. You don't want reduced duration, right? You don't want to go that far. But you don't want to, for example, have the quality of explosive arrow, which gives you skill effect duration, right? So for example, a 21-0 in a lot of cases is actually better than a 21-20. And as well as that, you also don't want to have increased duration anywhere else. And when it comes to, for example, aura choice, that is also why we choose Wrath over Malevolence, because Malevolence also gives you skill effect duration. But now let's get into the second most integral part in this build, and that is Elemental Equilibrium. Now, the way this keystone works is whenever you or your totems, or your ballistas in this case, hit an enemy, it can inflict exposure. And exposure in this case meaning minus 25% to resistances, right? And the way it works with Elemental Equilibrium is it goes off of opposites. So for example, if your hit had cold and lightning damage, there is fire missing, so the enemy will get fire exposure. And that is what you want to get because your ignite deals fire damage, right? But for example, if it dealt fire damage and lightning damage, it wouldn't give fire exposure anymore, right? So basically, that is why you want no added fire damage on any gear piece. And with added fire damage, I don't mean increased, right? Increased is completely fine. It increases your ignite, but stuff like this, right? For example, on your bow, adds so-and-so to fire damage, or on your jewelry, adds so-and-so to fire damage, or like just no flat fire damage. Now, I might be confused because you see here that explosive arrow has fire damage. So how exactly does that work? You can't ever take away that fire damage, right? Well, that is true. But the thing about explosive arrow is there is two sides to this skill. There is number one, the arrows themselves. Let's just unequip this real quick. The arrows themselves, which deal damage themselves. And then there is the explosion. And these hits happen separately, which means that basically you can have no fire damage on your arrow and still get the fire damage from your explosion. What is also required is that you have either a little bit of cold or a little bit of lightning damage anywhere. And that could be on your jewelry. For example, here adds so-and-so cold damage to attacks, or while leveling or like early mapping, you will probably have Storm Cloud, so that's already taken care of. But later you will need any roll anywhere, just to deal that tiny amount of damage to proc your Elemental Equilibrium. Now, why is it so important to proc that? You might say, well, that's just minus 25 resistances. It actually is not. You also get minus 25% extra resistance reduction from Mastermind of Discord. So whenever you're not proccing Elemental Equilibrium and you have like fire damage on somewhere on your gear, you're missing out on that. And minus 50 resistances can almost double damage against like high resistance enemies. So definitely look out for that. Next up, I want to clarify Elemental Overload just for a second here. So basically this gives you 40% more damage if you have crit in the past 8 seconds. That does not work for yourself. The skill that's in your ballistas has to actually crit, and it does work with ballistas. And the way you can see if you actually have it up is there's a tiny thing down here. It looks like a diamond shape. So whenever any of your ballistas crits, you get this diamond shape here, and now all of your ballistas deal 40% more damage. Next up, let's talk about our defenses. So we're going for a traditional Grace plus Determination plus Defiance Banner right here, right, for a ton of armor and evasion. And we're obviously also substituting that with a Molten Shell setup. And on top of that, what we're doing is we're getting 100% spell suppression. Your HP itself will depend very much on where you are in the game. Early mapping, you'll be around about 3 to 4k life. In red maps, you'll be around about 4.5 to 5k life. And in the later setups, you'll probably go up to 5.5-ish. You're not completely ailment immune, but you do get the Cannot Be Frozen from the Soul of the Brine King. It also has 50% reduced effect of chill on you. Now, as for the downside of this build, as this is a non-Hierophant totem build, you do not really have much recovery. However, the way we fix that is we actually have 2 dedicated life flasks. Now, you might be rolling your eyes right now, but I can assure you that for a League starter, having 2 life flasks is absolutely huge, especially since we actually have Flask Sustain. So number one, we're here. We can take the Profane Chemistry for the 1 flask charge every 3 seconds, which is huge. And we also have the Small Pantheon that gives us free life charges every 3 seconds if we haven't used one recently. So if they're out, we're going to get them back. As for gameplay, if you want to see some endgame fights, as I said, I played this one in 3.17 already. So I have a playlist. I will will link it down in the description, where basically we go from day 1 all the way up to feared. But just to show you how this build actually plays out, what buttons you have to press, I will show you a T9 map. We played this one on stream up to level 78. That's what we're currently at. So let's check it out. All right, so first up, your main skill will be Ballistas, right? And you can see here that sometimes you put down 2. That is because of one of the masteries, one of the totem masteries, which is very nice while clearing. And basically you just place, run. I will show you that exactly. Now, what you do sometimes is here or there, you're going to frenzy just to get your frenzy charges up, which gives you an extra attack speed, so extra fuses and some more damage. This one also has flammability on it. Obviously, if you have a flammability ring later, you can basically free up these gem spaces. But yeah, you have Hex Touch flammability on this one, and also faster attacks just to make it a little bit more cozy. Then you have an Arcanist brand setup that basically casts Flame Surge at enemies. And what Flame Surge does is it kind of leaves a burning ground, and that it's basically pseudo 25% more damage. I don't have it in PoE because sometimes enemies move out of it, but it's still free damage, so I kind of had to include it. As well as that, we have on left click our Molten Shell, so it's just up very often. You can also put it on cost when damage taken, but then it will be really annoying on our mana. So it will be a little bit annoying for just in general for the reservation, right? You have your Flame Dash, which is basically going to be your movement speed, and you have Lightning Spiral Trap at the end. And the reason you have Lightning Spiral Trap is it procs combustion. And the reason we have to put it on a trap is we have Ancestral Bond, which means we ourselves deal no damage, so we cannot ignite anything because we have to deal at least 1 damage to ignite, but our traps can still deal damage because they are not us. So if we put combustion on the trap, we can still get the -10 resistances from combustion. So stuff like the Arcanist brand with Flame Surge and the Lightning Spiral Trap, I basically never push ever in a map, right? Only at bosses. I will show you that exactly. And Frenzy you can push here or there. So basically this is going to be our playstyle. The Molten Shell is automated, right? And you just do this, and you have your Ignite Prolif basically doing all the work. Whenever you place down the totem, you also get Onslaught. But yeah, so basically we do this. Actually, we don't get Onslaught because I don't have the medium cluster on this. So we're going to be a little bit slower on this map, but whatever. You can imagine how 20% extra move speed would feel, and you just walk through. You also have phasing on kill. The thing with on kill effects on totems is if stuff dies from your damage over time, that means that you get the kill credit, which is awesome because we have phasing on kill on the passive tree, and we can also get very easy onslaught from onslaught on kill. For example, there's an essence here. I can actually frenzy, put up all my damage, right? And you can see it just melts, right? And this is without anything like crazy, right? We have basically just rares, a Storm Cloud, which is literally a level 9 bow or something, right? So yeah, we're just basically popping off. So let's head to the boss real quick so I can show you a little bit of single target as well. Once again, if you want to check out, for example, my feared fight, that will be my final update in the playlist that I'm going to link down below. It's definitely worth a watch. Overall, this build last league has been so incredibly cozy in terms of just doing all the content in the league. You just have to kind of be careful with some of the things like I talked about earlier with not having any flat fire damage on anything. So now you're at the boss, right? And basically all you do, so you can see most things are just going to die behind you, right? So if I track back here, basically everything died. There's maybe a few stragglers here or there, but usually your Ignite Prolif will take care of all of that. So now you put down all your ballistas, you throw down this, you throw down this, you do your frenzy stuff, and now basically it just stacks and it dies. Yeah. And this is how the build plays. Now, next up, let's talk about the Ascendancy. And the number one thing you're probably going to ask me, because there's also Hierophant versions out there. I wanted to demystify this a little bit, why I went for Elementalist over Hierophant. So overall, Hierophant is just not very strong for this build. You might think it's kind of like a give and take or like a decision, but in reality, for softcore, it really isn't. If you're on hardcore, right, 100%, I get it. You go for champion. You're going to be tanky. You're not going to die. You're going to deal a lot less damage. You're going to have no AoE. But on hardcore, I mean, something has to give, right? But let's look at what Elementalist has over Hierophant. So number one, it deals way more damage, and that is because of a few reasons. Now, Hierophant has Ritual of Awakening, which gives you 5% more damage per totem, which sums up to 35% more damage because you have 7 totems. But let's look at what Elementalist gets. It gets 25% more damage from Shaper of Flames. Minus 25 resist can be from 20 to 30% more damage depending on how much res your enemy has. And Heart of Destruction is also another 30% more damage. It also has way better small nodes, giving you extra attack speed, making it way easier to reach your cap. And since these are all different multipliers, they're all multiplicatively with each other, whereas this is just one multiplier, right? So overall, straight up, it's like 50 to 70% more damage for Elementalist. But probably the biggest thing is you get 60% AoE from Elementalist, which comes from Heart of Destruction. And you're basically always going to have this while mapping. And the reason is your totems cannot proc convergence. So basically what you do is during mapping, you're not really going to frenzy anyways, right? Or you're not going to have any unique mobs that you're going to hit. So you always have your 60% AoE. And once you're at the boss, once you hit with your frenzy, now that procs the convergence. So it's just perfect for a Ballista playstyle. You can exactly time when you want the AoE and when you want the more damage. And on a build with absolutely no access to AoE, having 0 AoE on a prolif build, on an explosion build, right? Your explosions are going to be tiny. Your prolifs are going to be tiny. It's going to be really bad time. But the list goes on. It's also that Elementalist doesn't need chance to ignite. Now, you might not think that's that big of a deal, right? Shaper Flames have your hits always ignite. You might not think that's that big of a deal, but for a skill like Explosive Arrow, which has no inherent chance to ignite. Now, let's look at chance to ignite and where you can get it, right? You need to get to 100%, or you have to use combustion in your main link, which will decrease your damage, right? Which would be really bad, because you can just get combustion for free elsewhere, right? So here you get chance to ignite. Now look at how tight our points are. We have to get here, we have to get here, we have to get here, right? Our points are super tight. Do you think we have, like, I don't know, 7 points to go here and then maybe go here, maybe go here? We don't, right? You can also go here, but that's another 5 points for Burning Brutality, right? It is just a complete disaster in terms of passive points. And then the last reason is Bastion of Elements is crazy strong. So Bastion of Elements, what it does basically is it triggers level 20 Primal Aegis when allocated. And the thing is, this is basically like a shield over your character that will protect you, and it refills over time. So whenever you get hit, you will take damage from that shield, and after like a few seconds, it will get recharged. This is absolutely huge. In endgame, you see here 75 elemental damage taken per allocated node. Now, nodes are basically everything, whether you have cluster jewels, right? This is a notable, this is a notable. And for every one of these, you get 75 shield. And in the endgame, that is around about 2k to 2.2k shield. It is huge, especially in a build that goes for a lot of armor, which protects you from physical, but we do not have any max res, so elemental damage is very scary, making Bastion of Elements a superb addition to this build. And then let's go over the upsides that Hierophant has. Number one, 7% life regen. People make this out to be a huge deal, right? For every totem you have 1% life regen. This is huge on a Ballista stacker, right? For example, like a strength stacker or a dex stacker that gets like 20 plus ballistas. This is an insane node. For 7% life regen, that is not worth going for a strictly worse ascendancy, right? Especially when you're here with the life nodes, and all you have to do on a Elementalist version versus a Hierophant version is go for an extra life flask, and you will not feel a difference. Then you get endurance charges, right, from the node down here. Conviction of power, which is very nice. The problem is, whereas endurance charges are very strong, our weakness is elemental damage. So we don't really have that covered as we do with the Elementalist. So even defense-wise, I would way rather have the Bastion of Elements than endurance charges. You also get more placement speed and an extra totem, right? You get quite a bit of placement speed from this node here. And the problem with that is just that placement speed is actually not that hard to come by. Number one, ballistas are already really quick to put down. You get placement speed from these nodes anyways. You get placement speed from these, placement speed from these. So it kind of feels like overkill. You can also just allocate the mastery that gives you a 30% chance to summon both, right? Which is basically like a 30% more placement speed on top of everything. It's cute. It's nice to have. The +1 number of totems is also quite nice because it doesn't, like, you don't really have to path to watchtowers, which is nice. It saves you a little bit of points, but these points are really strong anyways, right? They give you move speed, they give you totem damage, so I don't really know if that's necessary. And the problem with going to 7 totems is it's actually just complete overkill. 6 is everything you need. So overall, I would say 100% go for Elementalist. That being said, this build is strong enough to where you can still go Hierophant and do just fine. So for example, if you have a second build that you want to respec into an Inquisitor or anything and you don't want to re-level, I totally get it. I'm just saying, right? You can totally do that. Also, if you're like in a short race for some reason, just want to point that out, Hierophant is very good because you get 2 very crazy power spikes early, right? Early, the extra totem and placement speed is huge, right? And the Ritual of Awakening as well. Those 2 nodes are insane. But the problem, as always, with Hierophant is after you took Conviction of Power, and you don't even scale crit, by the way, so the power charges are lost, and then you have like nothing to take. So yeah, in terms of how I would allocate these, number 1, Shaper of Flames, I would take first. Basically, this means that all your damage will ignite, and your hits always ignite. Now, you also get 25% more damage, right? The thing is, your hits always ignite. You don't need any chance to ignite, and all damage can ignite means if you get lightning damage from somewhere, cold damage from somewhere, that also counts. In fact, even chaos damage does, right? Or physical damage. Then we have Mastermind of Discord. It's basically just there for minus 25 resistances, which is huge. Also, the small nodes are very nice to have. And Heart of Destruction is just very nice on a Ballista build for the reasons that I already mentioned. It gives us AoE. It gives us more damage against bosses when we need it. And Bastion of Element is just huge for defenses. Last league, I took Shaper of Storms. I would never do that again. Like Bastion of Elements is huge, which is also one of the reasons why you want to do Uberlab before you get into red maps. You really want this before you go into red maps because things are just going to hit way harder. So this is basically Cruel Lab, Merciless, like 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next for items. So just so you know, up here, I have 2 different item sets. The first one is called Decent Gear, and this is basically what you're going to have like end of red maps, right? Like this is basically just more conservative gear, whereas the great gear will be more something to strive towards when you're doing feared or something like that. As for leveling stuff, I will have a separate video out on that. So number 1, decent gear, right? So we're starting here with our bow. I will go over all the options for every single item slot. This is kind of what you want to hit early on. So you're going to start out with a Storm Cloud, and don't be like this is a really decent bow, right? You can use this one for quite a long time. You don't have to upgrade into this, but we're going to go into item priorities later. So this is basically a +2 bow that you make with a Shrieking Essence of Dread, which basically guarantees the +2 level of socketed bow gems. And all I did on here is hit T3 increased attack speed, right? And the thing you want to do with the short bow is you want to get Porcupine cards, right? These are divination cards that you're going to farm, and then you're going to get a short bow. You throw on Shrieking Essence of Greed, and you're going to have this, right? And you just craft on fire damage over time multiplier. As for your +3 bow, this is a little bit harder to get, right? This will take you like 3 or 4 essences on average, whereas a +3 bow, right, with good attack speed, like you also have to hit the +1 level socketed gems, or you can craft it, right? There's a lot of guides out there if you don't know how to do that. And then on top of that, you'll also have the fire damage over time multiplier. As for the quiver, basically not much changes between decent and great. Just so you know, you can wear a skirmish basically forever. I should actually put that in here. So skirmish is totally fine, right? Skirmish gives you an extra summoned totem, and this is basically going to be relevant until you're here at Watchtowers, which would be around about level 80, 82, something like that. At that point, you can replace the skirmish because you only need exactly 6 totem, 7 is overkill. And what a decent quiver would look like that you could replace it with would be something like this, right? Either a 2-point arrow quiver, or you have like attack speed, and implicit is also fine. You just have to be sure that you actually have enough accuracy, which can be a problem on this build, right? A little bit of life. I think this is like T4 damage over time multiplier, a little bit of damage with bows, and increased attack speed craft, right? So the way you can also make this is with woe essences, right? So you can throw on Screaming Essences of Woe, which basically guarantees on a quiver guarantees increased damage with bow skills. And the only difference between a decent and a great quiver here would be that on a great quiver, you would also have a lot of accuracy, right? You could fix all your accuracy at once. That would be really nice. You don't have to have it, but you have to have it somewhere, right? Maybe on a ring, whatever you feel like it. Now, damage over time multiplier with attack skills can go up to, I think, 26, yeah. Damage with bow skills can go up higher, and then you also don't want to neglect your life. And then at the end, you can craft on attack speed. Now, you can also get quivers with double damage over time multiplier, but I didn't want to go that far. Next up, for helmet, basically as for the helmet chant, the two good helmet chants are explosive arrow deals 40% increased damage, or explosive arrow has 15% increased attack speed. Now, important with the next few rares you're going to see is you're going to see a pattern. Every one of them has spell suppress on them. Spell suppress is absolutely huge, and as you see, even on the more budget version, we are capped on spell suppress. That's why we focus it. That's why you're not going to see a lot of mods on these items, because we really want that spell suppress, and it can sometimes be hard to get it. Basically, a little bit of life. I just put the armor and evasion randomly there. It's not really something you need. And also spell suppress. I think this is T3 spell suppress. You can get up to 22 if you have the monies for it. And the only difference from this to a great helmet would be you would have a prefix open for the physical damage from hits taken as fire damage, which does cost an exalt to actually craft. So just be mindful of that. You have a little bit more life. And you would maybe get a little bit more spell suppress on top. Also, just so you know, on none of these items I actually put on any Eldritch implicits, right? So you can also add a lot of character power there. Next up, for the body armor, all we have is T3 spell suppress, a T4 life roll, right, and a little bit of armor and evasion. Now, this doesn't have to be a Triumphant Lemelar. You can buy a pretty shitty base, right? Because if you want a 6-link, you can spend like 50 to 60 chaos and get something pretty good. You can also buy a corrupted 6-link, right? There's a lot of options. I would say upgrading from a tabula to something like this would be very nice round about start of red maps, right? Don't forget that you can also sell the tabula, so you're going to get some money from that as well. Now, the thing is, it doesn't have to be a armor evasion base, which is the best kind of base. It can be anything. Just be sure that it has evasion, right? Because otherwise you cannot roll spell suppress. And the only difference, also craft on the maximum life. And the only difference from this to this is basically fix your chaos res a little bit. You can do that on the body armor, for example, right? Maybe get even more spell suppress to ease up some passive skill tree points, right? But nothing much more than that. Then we have our gloves, which are basically just a bunch of life, right? Spell suppress, and have a suffix open for attack speed. Once again, no Eldritch implicits. So you can fix your spell suppress also with Eldritch implicits. Don't forget that you can also get fire damage over time multiplier, which is huge. I just left them blank here because otherwise people might get confused, because it's not important that you get like one exact implicit, right? And the only difference from this to this would be you would not craft attack speed, you would actually hit T1 attack speed, which is a little bit more spell suppress, and then you also have a prefix open for the damage during any flask effect. As for boots, basically for the enchant, I would take movement speed if you haven't been hit recently. It happens a lot. You have a lot of evasion, right? You're also going not to be in like enemies are not going to be in your face because your ballistas are taunting enemies, right? From the passive skill over here. So it's gonna be up quite a lot of the time, so you might actually want to farm for it if you wanna, right? Or you just hit it randomly. Move speed is important. Obviously 35 would be nice, but whatever. Then spell suppress, and we actually only have crafted life on here, right? So pretty damn realistic to get. And then for the great boots, all you have is 35% movement speed, which would be huge, right? And T1 life. As for Eldritch Implicits, you would really like either movement speed or action speed. Now, as for Amulet, our anoint will be hired killer. Now, last league, we tried to anoint watchtowers to free up a little bit of space here, but the problem is it costs 2 silver oils, so 2 silver oils, which can be like ADC, so it was just kind of annoying to get, right? Whereas hired killer only costs 1 opalescent oil, which is 1 below, right? So this is going to cost you around about 10-ish chaos at league start, and this is just so huge. Once again, the kill credit from your totems belongs to you if they kill with damage over time, which is always in this build since we're scaling Ignite. So this is just a nice bit of life, and recovered 2% on kill will feel so massive in terms of your region. I can promise you that. Now, what you're looking for is obviously you want as many mods that give you plus level of skill gems. Explosive arrow in terms of scaling is very similar to a spell, for example, which is why, for example, we have the plus levels on your bow, right? And then here we have like only +1 level of skills, damage over time multipliers. I think it's like T3, and then crafted life, right? You probably need strength somewhere. It doesn't have to be on the Emmy, but I mean, it's pretty free, right? So Amber or any other strength implicit is really nice. And then to the really good amulet, that would be a +2 with damage over time multiplier. Instead of the crafted life, you can also have elemental damage with attack skills, which does scale your ignite. But the problem is losing out on life can be pretty bad overall. Now, as for rings, so in this build, we have a combination of just a ring with life, accuracy, and then one craft that is going to give you either lightning damage or cold damage. It doesn't matter, right? You just need something to proc your elemental equilibrium. It just has resistances, right? There's nothing special here. And then a Death's Rush. Now, Death's Rush is really important before you get to the cluster version. In the cluster version, you get Onslaught from Sleepless Sentries. But up until then, getting the Onslaught on kill is absolutely huge, right? So let's go back to endgame. Now, this one is absolutely huge. It also gives you a little bit of armor. Accuracy is always nice. And it kind of fixes your chaos res on top. This ring usually costs like 1 to 5 chaos. So yeah. So that's basically your rings. And an end game later, what you will want in the great gear is you want a vermilion ring, which you want to craft on, or just buy it straight up, right? It doesn't have to be a vermilion ring. I just wanted to show you what to strive for. Maximum life is obviously huge. You can also go Coral Ring or fix your resistances, maybe Opal Ring if you really need to, whatever you want, but this would be GG. Then you get a ton of accuracy, which is nice, LE damage with attacks, high life, right? Even the catalysts on top to get the life even higher, and then you still need the craft for the elemental equilibrium. And then you also have Polaric Devastation. So this ring is huge, but the reason I don't have it in the other, a little bit more cheap version, right, is this can get quite expensive at Leaguestarter. So it's in my great gear, right? Don't go for this too early. It is nice, right? You get the cover enemies in Ash, which gives you 20% more damage, and it slows enemies down by 20% more damage, giving your ballistas a better like hit chance, which is super nice. It also gives a little bit duration, right? Some res. It's the perfect ring basically, but it can get up to like 5 to 6 exalts, and there's better things to buy. We will go over a priority list later, but basically this ring is huge. Now, as for belt, there is only one belt in here, and that's because this belt is insane. Diadian Dawn gives you up to 42% faster ignites. It's usually 35, but with the elemental catalysts, it actually scales up to 42. This belt is completely insane. If you look here, in terms of ignite DPS, it gives you 35% more damage. It has life. It has double resistances. It fixes your strength. This belt is a complete no-brainer. Go for it as soon as possible. Last week, there was a lot of people playing EA Ballista, and this one was like 40 to 60 chaos on the first few days, and then it dropped off to like 10 to 15 chaos very soon. So whenever you can pick it up, pick it up. As for flasks, now, at the start, you're only going to have a white granite flask, a white jade flask, a white quicksilver flask, life flask with like kind of okay mods, right? You don't have to have these mods at the start. These are more towards a little bit later. We're going to talk about this in the item progression, but basically this is how a perfect quote-unquote flask would look like, right? Now we want a granite, jade, and quicksilver flask to get armor, evasion, movement speed, and then you want a semi-instant life flask. This is basically a bubbling life flask, and a slow divine flask, which just gives you charges back whenever you get hit, so you can press more life flask. This one is more against dots or just slow incoming damage, and this one is against like whenever you need like life instantly, basically, right? So granite flask, jade flask, these are just there for like evasion armor. Whether you get the evasion rating on your granite flask or vice versa doesn't matter on the suffix, right? I just want to point that out because often you can kind of strike a bargain. People think granite flask increased armor, jade flask increased evasion, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't make any difference, right? So just get them wherever. And the same goes for movement speed. It doesn't have to be on your Quicksilver Flask. But yeah, movement speed is going to be huge for this build because we don't get any from the Ascendancy. As for what I'm doing on my Life Flasks is I have the semi-instant Life Flask with the Bubbling prefix, and then I have Remove Corrupting Blood, and bleeding, which is going to be super important. This one is a must-have. Roll this as quickly as possible. It doesn't take you many alterations, like 20-ish or something, right? And then this one here, you can decide whether you want to go versus poison or shock. I prefer to be shock immune. Next up, let's talk about skill gems. So whatever you're looking at, right? Whether you're looking at an endgame gear here or just a decent gear. Obviously, on a League Start scenario, you're probably not going to have any quality, right? So you would put this on 0 to simulate. We also have these down here, which are not ticked, right? But this would be GG for endgame, obviously. Get Awaken Gems. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Number 1, explosive arrow. We want a 21 explosive arrow with no quality. The reason you don't want quality is if you increase your duration, that's actually pretty bad for you because you delay the time where you're actually going to explode. And in case you're asking, definitely do not go for Divergent. It might look good on paper. I'm just going to assure you it is not. It is not worth scaling explosive arrow on Divergent. Just go for a 21-0. If you have a 21-20, it's a little bit of a downside. It's not the end of the world, but you definitely would prefer a 21-0. As for supports, most importantly, obviously Ballista Totem to let your Ballistas fire it. Ignite Proliferation is important. The reason I have this on my support and not like on a Notable or like on an Eldritch Implicit is because this has radius 20, which means you're going to have more AoE, which is going to scale with the 60% increased. So I would never give this up. If you really want to gem swap at bosses, you're going to have to get a white socket because there's no other really good blue gem that you can swap. So you have to get a white socket and then swap it with like burning damage or something if you really want to. But I mean, this skill still gives like 24% more damage, so I wouldn't really bother with it. Ignite Proliferation is huge. Deadly Ailments is huge because we're not going for hit scaling. It's straight up 44% more damage. Life tap is insane on this build. People are always asking me how to fix your mana. I can't do it even with a mana flask. Don't think about it. Slap on life tap. You're gonna thank me later. This is going to make your gameplay experience so much better. And then as for the Awakened Gems, so basically the Awakened Deadly Ailments would replace the Deadly Ailments, and the Awakened Burning Damage is one of the biggest upgrades of this build ever, right? So you're going to replace elemental damage with attacks completely. You don't need it for Awakened Burning Damage. And Awakened Burning Damage not only gives you even more damage, it also gives you +1 level of socketed fire gems once it's at level 5, right? So yeah, absolutely huge. Definitely go for this one as soon as you're in end game. Then we have our Frenzy setup. Frenzy gives you free Frenzy charges. We don't have Blood Rage, right? But Frenzy charges are always up because of Frenzy. We have Foster Attacks here. This is just to make it a little bit nicer to use. If you have a better idea, maybe you can throw in another Aura or something. You can definitely replace Foster Attacks. Then we have Hex Touch support with Flammability. This should be a higher level, obviously. And then you also want a little bit of quality. In total, Flammability gives you a ton of damage. Next up, your Divine Blessing setup. So basically what you do is you have Wrath, you put it on life tap, increase duration, and Divine Blessing. And whenever you press this Wrath, this aura, it's going to be a temporary aura for like 17, 18 seconds. But you're going to get it for free because it's on life tap. So you don't have to reserve it, but you still get like, what, 28% more damage. Then we have auras. So the 3 most important auras are Determination, Grace, Defiance, Banner. This is your triage of defensive auras. It is absolutely necessary and crazy strong. And Precision is basically there to fill up for accuracy that's going to miss on your gear. With absolutely perfect GG gear, you're not going to need Precision. You can actually think about doing other things like maybe Skitter Bots for even more damage, or maybe you can even get a Purity of Elements in there. I don't know. But right now, with realistic gear, you're going to need a little bit of Precision. These are not set in stone. If you're missing, if you can't reserve everything, just level this down, right? Don't be careful with leveling this. You can just buy them at the vendor again and level it up again to whatever you need. However much accuracy you need, just look here, right? If you go to Explosive Arrow, right now I'm just like leveling. I only have 97% main chance to hit, but you really want to have 100% here. And if you have that, you don't need any more levels. Don't reserve anything more. Then we have our Flame Surge setup. This is basically on an Arcanist brand because it's just really cozy, right? You throw down the brand and you want to press Flame Surge a lot because enemies are going to move and it has a very low AoE, right? So if you throw the Arcanist Trap on an enemy, the Flame Surge is basically going to follow your enemy and you're always going to have the 25% more damage basically up, which is huge. It doesn't matter where you have this tool link. Same thing is true. It also doesn't matter where you have this tool link here, which is the Lightning Spire Trap with Combustion. The reason you need to proc Combustion on Lightning Spire Trap, the -10 fire resistance, is because you do no damage yourself, right? Because you're Ancestral Bond, but your traps still do damage. And in order to ignite, you need to do at least 1 damage, so that is what the trap provides. And you have a 1-link Flame Dash as your movement skill. And at the end, you also have Val Molten Shell. You don't need to use Val Molten Shell. It's going to be a little bit expensive to get it at the start. You're just going to go Molten Shell. But later it's very nice. It's kind of like an oh shit button whenever things go down, and you're basically going to be invulnerable for a bit. Now, next up, let's talk about passive tree. So number one here, I have throughout the acts, for every single act, I have a progression here. So Act 1, for example, then you go to Act 2, Act 3, and so forth. We're going to talk about this in the leveling video more, but just so you know, it's down here. Then I have an early maps one, and then the two we're going to look at is endgame and cluster endgame version. Going back to the gear, your passive tree that's going to fit to the decent gear is going to be the endgame, and then the big boy gear up here is going to belong to the cluster endgame version. So let's talk about the cluster endgame version, right? The endgame version and the like the cluster endgame and the endgame version are only going to basically distinguish themselves by the cluster jewels, so might as well go over everything right here, right? So number one, we want to get to Elemental Overload and Ancestral Bond. Ancestral Bond gives you an extra totem. If you're asking how you get to 6 totems, you get 3 as a base, then 1 from Ancestral Bond, then 1 from Panopticon, and then 1 from Watchstars for a total of 6. And Elemental Overload can proc on totems. It's basically just 40% more damage. More on that in the mechanic section if you haven't watched that. Now, next up, we're just stacking .multi here and here, right? Now, as for clusters, we're going to go over that a little bit later. Your reservation comes from Sovereignty, the small nodes, and the reservation mastery. As for masteries themselves, the totem masteries are the most important ones. Totems taunt enemies around them for 1 second when summoned is a game changer. This will mean that enemies will literally completely ignore you and go for your totems, which is hilarious. Often it even stops their like big spells or whatever, and they're just gonna walk to the totems and auto attack. It is glorious. This mastery, take it as soon as possible. The no-brainer 50 life mastery right here. Totemic Zeal is gonna make the build feel a lot better. It's gonna give you placement speed, more attack speed. Profane Chemistry is huge, and if you have the points at the levels, right now, this tree here is level 94, right? The other one was 92. But basically, if you have even more levels, you can also go for the Life Flasks gain 1 charge every 3 seconds, which is going to make it even easier to sustain. But yeah, basically, Profane Chemistry is huge. Now we have a Unnatural Instinct here. Now, this item will free up 4 passive points for you and basically allow you to go into this cluster jewel at all, right? In, for example, the endgame version, you can see we don't have the Unnatural Instinct jewel here, and we actually allocate Avatar of the Hunt, but in the cluster endgame version, we do not. The important thing about this cluster is the chance to gain phasing on kill. You get the kill credit for damage over time once again, and it also gives a lot of attack speed. We get, with Unnatural Instinct, all of these small nodes as well, right? That's a lot of damage, right? Damage with elements, attack speed, damage with elements, right? And here we have damage over time, evasion damage over time, attack speed phasing. It's just absolutely huge. Unnatural Instinct, we're going to talk about that later, is one of the biggest power spikes of this build. And we just go here for the usual stuff. Art of the Gladiator, Deadly Draw is very strong, right? We go down through Golem's Blood. If you're running Vitality, which in this version, I think I'm not anymore, actually. I'm going to allocate that later. But if you're running Vitality, you can also take this to make your reservation easier. And down here is the big cluster. This is where you want to be as soon as possible while leveling. This is Surveillance, which gives you a lot more damage, attack speed. This one gives you the +1 totem. And then Ironwood is very nice. You have 6 totems, 6 times 150 armor is what you get, which is just absolutely huge. And on top of that, what's even more important is you get 30% increased totem life, but you also get 30 all res. And totems have, on normal, they have 40 all res, and giving them an extra 30 gets them almost to capped at 75. If you can get like another roll on a jewel to get it actually capped, that's nice, but 70 is usually enough. Also, do not take Iron Reflexes on this build. Evasion Armor Hybrid is way, way, way better, and that's mainly because we're a bow build. We don't have any block. We have, if you allocate Iron Reflexes, we have 0 avoidance. Imagine just for a little bit more armor, giving up 78% chance to evade, right? Like straight up 4 out of 5 hits don't scratch you, right? They do no damage. It's just absurd, right? Don't take Iron Reflexes. Elemental Equilibrium is basically what gives you a huge power spike. Definitely take a look at the mechanics section if you don't know how this works. Then we go over here, we take the quick step. This is going to give you a lot of spell suppress. Also in the other version, I'm pretty sure, in the other version, we have reflexes allocated to get to the 100% spell suppression because our gear is worse, right? So the more spell suppression you get from the gear, at some point you will be able to not to unallocate these points, which is very, very nice. You go through here, Heart of Oak is huge. And all of this is basically just to path to Watchtowers, which gives you your 6th totem. Also, these small nodes give you some extra damage and placement speed. Next up, let's talk about item progression. This is something a lot of people don't take into consideration. Actually planning out what you want to get first, right? Priorities, basically. Now, I want to give you a little bit of guidance on that. I actually wrote down a little bit during leveling, straight after maps, and then I go into mid-tier and even end-game upgrades, right? So stick with me, and let's go through it. Starting during leveling, where you really, really want a Stormcloud and a Skirmish to start respecking into EA Ballista. I'm going to go into this in-depth in the leveling guide. Just know that you want this Stormcloud and the Skirmish here. None of these cost more than maximum 1 to 2 chaos, right? Now, straight after the campaign, you really want to look that all your gear pieces have life on them. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time, and that is because you're low level, and per level you get flat life, but you don't have any levels, so you're going to bleed, right? So just do that, otherwise you're going to be on like 2k life. Resistances have to be capped because enemies are balanced around that, right? The passive tree has a lot of res in it, so that's going to help a lot. And also cap your accuracy. Just look in game that you are always on at least 95 to 100%. And also on top of that, a tabula rasa goes a long way, no matter how you farm it, right? And whether you do that through divination card, through chaos recipe, for heist, it doesn't matter. Then we have some mid-tier upgrades, just to remind you, the porcupine div cards to get the 6-link short bow. Then you throw some shrieking essences of dread on it for the +2 bow if you get anything else that's really nice. +3 if you're lucky. Diadian Dawn is huge, but if it's too expensive, you can also get it later. Start filling up your spell suppression. Better safe than sorry, right? But once you're in rap maps, you want to be at least at like 70 to 80%. Then try getting 2 okay jewels, right, with life and, for example, attack speed or burning damage or damage over time, because you're going to have these 2 1-point jewels that are just very, very efficient. After that, get your flasks in order. Get them like 2 life flasks, a Quicksilver, Granite, Jade, get Glass Porous Bubbles on them for some quality. Then get an EA Helm Enchant, which can be either 15% attack speed or 40% increased damage. And at the end, just figure something out about Eldritch Implicits. There is a lot of good stuff out there. I didn't want to put them into the POB because I didn't want to confuse people. It's just about getting anything useful at the start. And then your endgame upgrades are basically going to be Unnatural Instinct. If you get this one early, you're lucky because these go up like crazy. Usually they start at like 4x, and they can go up to like 10 to 12x if you're too slow. +3 bow attack with attack speed is going to be your end game bow, as we talked about. Polaric Devastation can be incredibly expensive, so it is very good, but I wouldn't like super prioritize it. Definitely get your Unnatural Instinct before you do that. They're going to be both in kind of the same price range. Then 3 to 4 stat jewels, basically upgrade the 2 stat jewels that we talked about to something a little bit better. Maybe you can fix your resistances with the 4th stat or something, and then +2 amulets. But overall, I hope I could give you a good overview of this build. There will be another leveling guide coming out. Don't forget that there's like different passive trees here for the acts and everything. There's 2 different gear sets that you can look at. I have some more uniques here at the end that you can maybe use, like maybe a Rain of Splinters if you want to clear even faster. I'm really stoked about this build because this time around there's no like guesswork, right? We know how awesome this build is. We know this build is going to be huge. No balance changes means security in that, at least no baits for anybody. But once again, I have a lot of footage of this build if you're not sure if you want to play it, so definitely check that out on my channel. The playlist with the day 1 to day 6 up to Feared Kill, I think Feared Kill was day 5, but whatever, is going to be in there. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and have a good league start. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, whether I just gave you your league starter for 3.18 or you just learned a few things about a build you're maybe never going to play, I don't know. I hope you at least enjoyed your time here. I will be streaming everything over on twitch.tv/Palsteron, as I already talked about. So if you want to hang out, if you want to have a community, if you want somebody who plays the same build as you and can maybe give you tips here or there, then definitely join. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.